let me just now turn to the next stage because of time. I want to hand over to Victoria Chisala and the panel. They are ready to take us into discussions this morning. So, Victoria, are you ready?
Yes, thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're coming from. So thank you very much, Solomon. I think we'll move on to the next session. We're very pleased to have the opportunity to speak to some of our distinguished panelists this morning. As you know, the rising sovereign debt situation needs to be tackled quickly and sustainably. While the G20 GSSI has helped somewhat, the liquidity support has been temporary and inadequate to cover all the financing gaps, as has been mentioned. Moreover, it expired in December 2021, and now countries have resumed the payment of postponed debt services, putting pressure on public finance at a time when global financial conditions have tightened. The G20 Common Framework has raised some hopes because of its broader scope, which includes both the Paris Club and non-Paris Club private creditors. However, it has faced several challenges and has been slow in its implementation, as has been mentioned by some of our speakers. Now, the objective of this session is to discuss the critical situation of rising debt vulnerabilities in Africa, take stock of the current debt restructuring initiatives, and build a better understanding of the challenges and experiences in their implementation. But first, before we begin, let me introduce our distinguished panel, two of whom you've already met. First of all, I'd like to introduce Professor Kevin Urama, who is the Acting Chief Economist and Vice President for the Economic and Governance and Knowledge Management at the African Development Bank Group. Professor Urama is an elected fellow of the African Academy of Sciences, professor in the School of Public Leadership, Stellenbosch University, South Africa, among other distinguished positions. Prior to his appointment as Senior Director of the African Development Institute, he was Senior Advisor to the President of the African Development Bank on inclusive growth, green growth, strategy, policy, development, and implementation. Welcome back, Kevin. And our second speaker has already spoken as well. This is good morning, Kevin.
Yeah, thank you, Victoria.
Yes, our second panelist is Guillaume Chabet, who has also just spoken. He's Deputy Director, SPR Department in the International Monetary Fund. Guillaume is a graduate from the École Centrale de Paris, the Paris Institute of Political Studies. He has worked in the Directorate General for Local Government at the French Ministry of Interior and the French Treasury. Other appointments include the G20 Project Manager, advisor to the French Prime Minister, among other positions. So welcome, Guillaume.
Thank you very much, Victoria. Good evening.
Thank you.
Good evening, good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you very much. I would like to next introduce His Excellency, Mr. Tahir Hamid Guilin, who is the Chad's Minister of Finance and Budget since June 2019. He was the Director General of the Treasury 2005 to 2006 and the Director General of Taxes 2006-2008. From 2016 to 2018, he was the CEO of SHT, Chad's National Oil Company. Welcome, Your Excellency. Do we have His Excellency? Welcome. Next, I would like to introduce Mr. Mukuli Chikuba, who is Permanent Secretary for Budget Economic Affairs at the Ministry of Finance and National Planning. He's responsible for the preparation and the execution of the national budget in collaboration with other government institutions. Mr. Mkuba has also served on a number of boards, including those in the mining sector, pensions, and state-owned companies. He holds a bachelor's degree in economics, a master's degree in development studies, and is a doctorate candidate for business administration. Mr. Mukuli, you're welcome. Good morning.
Good morning once again. This is Gregory Kabwe, representing Mr. Mukuli Chikuba, who is attending to other national assignments. My name is Gregory Kabwe, as I earlier indicated, and I'm the Director in charge of investments and debt management in the Ministry of Finance and National Planning in the Republic of Zambia. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry for that. We didn't catch that one in the last the last change. Thank you. Next, I would like to introduce Dr. Brooke Taye, who is a senior advisor at the Ministry of Finance in Ethiopia, supporting its ambitious economic transformation and strategy. This includes privatization and liberalization activities of the government, liability management, and debt optimization. Prior to this, he worked as an investment fund manager for a private equity fund in Florida and as an economist for a banking firm in New York. Dr. Brooke has a law degree from the School of Oriental and African Studies, a master's in law and economics from the University of Bologna, University of Ghent, and University of Aix-de-Provence, and a PhD from the Université Paris-Saclay. I hope I've pronounced that correctly. Welcome, Dr. Taye.
Thanks so much, Victoria. Great to join this.
Thank you very much. Last but not least, we have William Roos, who is Assistant Secretary for Multilateral Development and Trade Affairs at the French Ministry of Economy, Finance and Industrial and Digital Sovereignty. He's also co-chair of the Paris Club, the main international forum for sovereign debt restructuring, and co-chair of the G20 International Financial Architecture Working Group. He previously served as director for France at the board of directors of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Mr. Roos holds a Master's of Advanced Studies in Industrial Economics, Microeconomics, and Econometrics from Sorbonne University and graduated from the École nationale de la statistique de l'analyse économique. So thank you very much. Welcome, Mr. Roos.
Merci beaucoup, Victoria. Thank you very much to you, to all your colleagues at the African Development Bank, and for the colleagues in the Japanese ministry. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Oh, thank you very much. Before we begin, I would just like to confirm if we have His Excellency present. I am not able to see him on the screen, so kindly advise if we have His Excellency present. Colleagues?
Victoria, this is Abdullah. Good morning.
Il a des difficultés pour se connecter.
Allez-y, Monsieur le Directeur.
Oh, all right. Thank you very much. So we'll proceed and we'll get back. Please let me know when His Excellency has arrived in the room. Thank you very much. Okay, so what I would like to do next, colleagues, is that I would like just to go over a few questions, and I would like each one of our panelists to give 5 minutes response to the questions asked, and then we will move on to the next part of the session. So first of all, I would like to start with Dr. Brooke Taye from Ethiopia, and the question is, Ethiopia is undertaking debt restructuring under the G20 Common Framework. What has been your experience with debt restructuring under the Common Framework, and what have been the key challenges and successes so far? What can be done to improve the debt restructuring process through the Common Framework? So it's over to you, Dr. Taye.
Thanks so much, Victoria. I really appreciate for the time, and want to extend my thanks to the bank for organizing such an event. Before, obviously, wanted to jump into the challenges and our experiences, I really wanted to emphasize that it's not all doom and gloom in Africa. Our economy is growing. It's a resilient economy. We managed to sustain COVID. We managed to sustain a global shock in terms of commodity prices, in terms of conflict. So I know we're talking about debt. I know we're talking about sustainability of debt, but for the audience who's following this conversation, I don't want us to leave this this panel by emphasizing it's all doom and gloom. Come and visit Ethiopia, come and visit Senegal, come and visit South Africa. You'll see the entrepreneurial spirit of this wonderful continent. So just wanted to emphasize that. Having said that, in terms of our experience, look, the Common Framework is a very novel idea whereby we needed to figure out from the start where to send the letters in terms of requesting the date reprofiling request, the date treatment request. But once the initial difficulties in terms of identifying where exactly at the Paris Club the common framework will be triggered, identifying individual countries where we need to communicate in terms of our intention to trigger the bilateral discussion or request for the date treatment. Our experience is that the management of the conversation, the work, and the interaction was stellar. The interaction and the discussion was stellar. Yes, there was a delay, especially for non-Paris Club members to join the conversation at the initial stage because of the novelty of this process. But once the chairmanship of our creditor committee has been established, which is France and the People's Republic of China, the discussion was excellent. So, of course, the question is if our experience is excellent in terms of our relationship with our bilateral creditors and then the co-chairmanships of our creditor committee, why Ethiopia has not received the financing assurance that it requested. It's because of the delay in terms of the funds program being approved with the IMF. And of course, it expired in 2021 in September. So by the time our creditor committees have established and start working, our program has expired. And one of the things that's very important to make a reference is for the common framework, to request for a common framework date treatment, you need to have an underlying program that would allow you to request, because you need to identify your financing gap, and then the financing gap would be met by donors, IMF program, and of course with the creditor committee's financing assurance. So the lag to establish the creditor committee at the start contributed to the delay of the establishment of the creditor committee. The creditor committee, once it's established, then the approval of the work of the creditor committee was delayed because there is no fund program that we can rely on. So that's the complexity, and that's why there was a delay. Ethiopia has requested for a new fund program, and we had a technical mission 3 months ago, and we expect another mission sometime in September, and we hope with a very good relationship and ideas that in terms of what type of policy instrument that we need to introduce so Ethiopia can continue its growth trajectory, coming out of a very difficult domestic issues, as you all know. We are hoping that the funds program's approval would allow the creditor committee to establish, to continue its work and provide us the financing assurance. As of today, there has been 4 creditor committee meetings. We've been briefed on all those meetings with our counterparts from the Paris Club, and I want to emphasize that I'm glad that Mr. William is on the call as well. We have been receiving constant updates on the progress, so we're very much comfortable with the structure itself. So in terms of improvement, I just want us to be very careful in terms of what we're trying to suggest as improvement. This is a difficult process because of the nobility of the structure, but it's a process that would work. Just because it's difficult, we don't need to overcomplicate it. For example, in terms of transparency issue, every country that will request a date reprofiling or a date treatment needs to share those data to the IMF and to the World Bank to design the date sustainability analysis. So the transparency of that issue needs to be solved by the country and the multilaterals. In terms of timeline, it's very difficult to have a timeline, specific timeline set to this type of complex processes when you have so many bilateral creditors. For us, over 20 different countries where all of them has to go through their process. So timeline, yes, it's important, but it's a working process. Now, the 3 countries that have requested are seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. We think we need to work on sharing expertise and experiences on how we manage to navigate through it. I don't think adding another layer of requirements would make this a more efficient process. But finally, before I conclude, Victoria, I wanted to raise one important issue which we think needs to be addressed collectively. When we requested the debt treatment under the common framework, it was not a debt stock issue. Ethiopia does not have a debt stock issue. Our debt to GDP ratio is around 50%. The government of Ethiopia has decided unilaterally for the past 4 years and has not borrowed 1 cent on the commercial terms. So we're doing our best to make sure that our debt is sustainable. Our request for a debt treatment is we have a flow problem. Our export is not growing in a way and shape or form that we wanted so that we can cover our debt exposures. In doing that, this should have been encouraged by rating agencies, for example. What we've suffered in the past 2 years since we've requested the debt treatment is a significant barrage of downgrade, which if we were trying to access the financial market, we would have been locked out. So there needs to be a bigger discussion, which is forcing other countries who are looking at Ethiopia's and then seeing not so many of a debt stock issue, but requesting a debt treatment and having a significant amount of downgrade, resulting to causing a negative reaction in the market, not allowing them to go and ask for a debt treatment, because it was said earlier by Ghulam that there are over 77 countries. I guarantee you most of them would need this type of exercise. One of the reasons which we assume that they're not going and asking for this is the reaction in terms of the rating agencies. And that has to be a collective discussion that needs to happen. So what happens, rather than going through a channel of making sure the debt reprofiling exercise is fulfilled, they're going back to the market, asking for more money, and then expanding the debt problem. So I think as part of the improvement, what we would submit to this panel and to the wider partners is to really look into not punishing a country who's trying to address its debt sustainability issue. Thanks so much, Victoria.
Thank you very much for those very, very important points that you've raised. And I think that has been some of the challenges. And would like to reassure you that it's not a doom and gloom. I think we're led by the African optimist in chief, the president. So we certainly have a balanced view about what that means for the African continent. So be assured. But thank you very much for those important points that you raised. And we hope we can come back to them during the conversation that will follow. Next, I would like to ask Mr. Gregory Kabwe on behalf of the Zambian government. Zambia has embarked on a debt restructuring program under the G20 Common Framework, becoming one of the test cases of the framework. I would like to find out how the debt restructuring under the Common Framework has progressed so far in your experience, and what have been the key challenges and successes of this process. From your perspective, what should be done to speed up the restructuring process and resolve the country's debt distress challenge? So over to you, Mr. Kabwe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Victoria. And I'll be quite brief in presenting Zambia's case. Firstly, I want to just give a very brief background to Zambia's debt problem. And this was initially brought up by virtue of the various infrastructure projects that the previous government embarked on in order to bridge the infrastructure gap in the country. And this led to extensive borrowing. And we also had some weak controls, we should say, in terms of construction process, loan construction process. So as at 2019, Zambia started defaulting on the external debt service. And in 2020, measures had to be put in place in order to try and restore debt sustainability there we stopped contracting non-concessional loans, and the problem of failure to debt service, of course, continued in 2020, and we had to request creditors for a moratorium on debt service. But then we also were impacted negatively by the COVID-19 pandemic, if you recall, and therefore it became a big problem in 2020. We had to do a debt service standstill in October 2020, and leveraged on the debt service suspension initiative, which was being promoted by the Paris Club Secretariat and the G20 member countries. So we leveraged on the DSSI, the first DSSI. We also leveraged on the common framework. But before I get there, I can just mention that the debt service suspension initiative was finalized with only a few creditors, about 6-7 creditors who signed with us the debt service suspension initiative. But even though we did not sign the DSSI with these other creditors, we could not do debt service because we implemented what we call the debt service standstill in October 2020, where we stopped debt service on all creditors and just did debt service on multilateral creditors, the World Bank and the others. Now, we had to also apply to the IMF for the extended credit facility under the common framework, so that we do the debt restructuring, which we so much need. As I come there, I want to just mention that conversations or negotiations, Zambia, in December last year, we reached the staff level agreement. And when we reached the staff level agreement, the process to constitute the official creditors committee began. We had the first meeting of the official creditors committee in June 2022, and the second meeting was held the following month, which was July. We obtained the financing assurances thereafter, and we expect that the financing assurances that have been obtained will be consolidated into a report by the mission, the fund mission, to the board, probably this month. And therefore, we expect Zambia's case to be tabled by the IMF. So the discussions have progressed quite well as regards the IMF discussions. Now, the experiences that we have seen over this time have been quite diverse. We definitely needed the official creditors committee to be formed earlier than it was formed. If you recall, we reached the staff level agreement in December 2021 and only had the first official creditors committee meeting in June. This was because some creditors had not yet come on board to facilitate the formation of this committee. So that delay was one of the key challenges that we faced, because if we had this official creditors committee forming even as early as January, today we could be talking about an IMF program being approved for Zambia, and therefore continued to negotiate with the other creditors. The other issue that we would like to highlight is the issue to do with creditor participation. I think there have been concerns from our engagements that we've had with the various creditors. For instance, the Eurobond holders, the other private creditors have, rendered their displeasure when it comes to non-inclusion in the official creditors committee. They feel that they are left behind. Something is being discussed on Zambia, and they will be given to follow what the other creditors, the bilateral creditors, had earlier deliberated upon. So perhaps this is one area that for the future could be considered for improvement, to try and see at what stage can the private creditors or the commercial creditors be brought on board just to ensure that they don't feel less privileged in terms of obtaining the information that is being shared with official creditors, with the official creditors committee. The other issue that we'd like to just highlight from our perspective as Zambia is that I think the common framework requires clarity in terms of process. I think we need a step-by-step kind of mechanism that outlines the follow-up steps towards debt restructuring and restoration of debt sustainability. Of course, for Zambia, we've been helped greatly by the financial and legal advisors. We've also been helped greatly by the World Bank and the IMF, including the Paris Club Secretariat, in defining the next steps and what we do from where we are going forward, especially from the time that we reached the staff level agreement with the IMF. But we think there should be room for improvement in this regard. Guidelines also, I think, have got to be properly outlined that should guide the process of debt restructuring under the common framework. We think this is one area which is not very clear and should be looked at going forward. The other area that we would like to highlight from our experience as a country is the issue of creditor classification. There are creditors that are classified as multilateral, or is it a preferred creditor status? But when it comes to how they lend, they are lending on commercial terms, which makes it very, very difficult for us to classify them as multilaterals or preferred creditors in that regard. So I think this is one area, again, that requires attention. We have creditors in the likes of TDB, Africa Trade Development Bank, Afri-Exim Bank, and perhaps a few more that are lending on commercial terms. But when it comes to the documentary information that we deal with, and that is associated with their formation, you realize that they may be having preferential status, which makes it difficult in classifying them. So we have a category that we are calling the plurilateral category. So we have multilateral, we have plurilateral, we have commercial, we have bilaterals, and stuff like that. But this is one area that I think requires clarity going forward as far as categorizing of creditors is concerned. From our experience, we also have noticed that transparency is key in the whole process, from the beginning to the end of the debt restructuring process. One, it's building trust in terms of our engagements with our various creditors. And secondly, it is creating a mechanism of sharing of information, critical information, timely with our creditors, making it easy for engagements, future engagements, and negotiations that we're embarking on. Mm-hmm. So in so doing, we have expanded the scope in terms of reporting. Instead of just reporting central government debt, we are also reporting on guaranteed debt and non-guaranteed debt. That is affecting the country. Non-guaranteed debt that is associated with state-owned enterprises that have such. We've also
Mr. Kawa, we'll have to wind you up in a little bit. We'll probably have to be able to come back to some of the issues.
Okay, thank you.
So thank you very much. And everybody is keenly looking at this example to see what lessons can be learned. And I think a lot can be also exchanged between the countries involved, Ethiopia, and Zambia in terms of their experiences in this engagement. So I'm glad that we have a number of different stakeholders, and I would like at this point to call on Mr. William Roos, who's the chairman of the Paris Club. And as you know, the Paris Club has been actively involved in developing and implementing debt resolution frameworks, including the G20 Common Framework. I would like to know from you, William, what has been your experience with the G20 Common Framework from your perspective, and what mechanisms can be put in place to strengthen coordination among the different stakeholders and accelerate actions towards ensuring an appropriate and fit for purpose international response to the debt challenge in Africa. I think you've listened to our two earlier speakers to give you some perspectives from what their thinking is in terms of their engagement, and would like to hear from you on that. So over to you, William.
Thank you very much, Victoria. As I have the opportunity to speak in French, I will use this opportunity. So I invite you to use the interpretation. Donc, merci beaucoup, Victoria, pour cette question. Et je pense que c'est effectivement très utile que cette réunion ait lieu. Donc, un grand merci à la Banque africaine de développement et au Japon, parce qu'effectivement, il faut écouter l'ensemble des pays, les créanciers, mais aussi les pays débiteurs, les pays africains et aussi probablement des pays non africains. Et au niveau du G20 et au niveau du Club de Paris, comme l'a expliqué Guillaume Chabert, nous avons mis en place un cadre totalement nouveau, historique, qui nous permet, et je voudrais insister là-dessus, c'est mon premier point, qui nous permet de créer des liens entre des institutions qui se parlaient auparavant, mais de manière assez formelle. Et aujourd'hui, les experts de dette du Club de Paris, mais aussi les experts de dette de la Chine, de l'Inde, de l'Arabie saoudite, de l'Afrique du Sud et d'autres pays, nous apprenons à travailler ensemble. Et c'est probablement quelque chose que je voudrais ajouter à tout ce qui a été dit et que je partage, c'est que c'est un atout important. Nous apprenons à travailler. Nous avons, comme il a été mentionné par les différents ministres africains, nous formons des comités de créanciers qui sont coprésidés entre un membre, donc la France, et un membre du G20 qui n'est pas membre du Club de Paris. Donc, nous avons une coprésidence avec l'Arabie saoudite pour le Tchad, et nous avons une coprésidence avec la Chine pour la Zambie et pour l'Éthiopie. Et pour la Zambie, nous avons fait une innovation, nous avons introduit une position de vice-président pour l'Afrique du Sud, ce qui permet d'avoir des échanges encore plus riches. Et donc, ce qui se passe, c'est que nous avons créé quelque chose qui n'est pas on applique les règles du Club de Paris en invitant la Chine, l'Inde et d'autres à nous rejoindre. On crée quelque chose de nouveau et on travaille ensemble entre le secrétariat, les experts à Paris et les experts en Chine, les experts en Arabie saoudite, en Afrique du Sud, en Inde, etc. Donc, il y a vraiment quelque chose de nouveau qui se crée. Les atouts, ce que j'ai ressenti, c'est que l'atout de ce cadre commun, c'est que cela assure une cohérence pour le pays débiteur, pour la Zambie, pour l'Éthiopie, pour le Tchad. Ça permet d'avoir l'ensemble des créanciers officiels qui travaillent de manière cohérente avec les paramètres du programme FMI et aussi de manière cohérente avec le calendrier d'un programme FMI. Il est évidemment toujours possible pour un pays de faire les choses de manière parallèle, d'engager de manière bilatérale avec les différents créanciers. Mais est-ce que ça prendrait moins de temps? Je n'en suis pas sûr, parce qu'il y a toujours celui qui a besoin le plus de temps, il en a toujours besoin. Mais je crois que d'avoir tout le monde autour de la table assure cette cohérence de vue. Et je pense qu'en fait, au fur et à mesure, on gagne du temps. Le deuxième atout que j'ai ressenti ces derniers mois, c'est qu'il y a un suivi politique qui est effectué au niveau du G20. Et, évidemment, au niveau du G20, on ne rentre pas dans les détails des KPI. Ces détails techniques sont discutés de manière confidentielle dans le cadre des comités de créanciers, mais il y a un suivi politique au niveau du G20. Et si vous regardez les différents communiqués du G20, vous voyez qu'il y a des appels à aller plus vite, des appels vers les créanciers privés. Et je pense que dans certains cas, et je pense notamment dans le cas du Tchad, je pense que ce levier politique du G20 a aidé à engager notamment à discuter pour le Tchad et ses conseillers financiers, à discuter avec les créanciers privés parce qu'il y avait ce suivi politique et cette je dirais, pression politique pour que les choses délivrent. Alors, les premiers résultats, je le reconnais, sont modestes. Ils existent quand même, hein, comme l'ont signalé les différents intervenants. Nous avons délivré des assurances de financement pour le Tchad et pour la Zambie, ce qui permet d'ouvrir la voie à des programmes FMI. Et nous montrons que nous restons mobilisés pour l'Éthiopie. Il y a une courbe d'apprentissage, nous progressons. Nous avons, si je prends le cas de la Zambie par rapport au Tchad, il nous a fallu, je crois, près de 5 ou 6 réunions entre la création du comité et les assurances de financement pour le Tchad. Et pour la Zambie, entre la création du comité et les assurances de financement, cela a pris environ 1 mois et 2 réunions. Donc, on apprend à travailler de manière plus efficace. L'enjeu aujourd'hui, sur les cas que vous avez mentionnés, hein, Tchad, Zambie et Éthiopie, c'est de montrer que non seulement on peut délivrer des assurances de financement, mais qu'on va au bout et qu'on peut ensemble faire des traitements de dette. Donc, il faut qu'on montre, dans le cas du Tchad et dans le cas de la Zambie, qu'on peut effectivement aller jusqu'au bout en gardant cet esprit constructif et de consensus entre les membres du Club de Paris et les membres du G20. Ensuite, pour finir, il y a votre question qui est très importante et qui est au cœur des débats aujourd'hui, c'est comment on peut faire mieux. Et la position des membres du Club de Paris est de soutenir les directions qui ont été présentées par Guillaume Chabert et qui ont été effectivement rendues publiques par le FMI et par la Banque mondiale. Je voudrais notamment insister sur l'importance de donner de la clarté sur le processus. C'est quelque chose qui a été évoqué par le Tchad, la Zambie et l'Éthiopie, et aussi par Guillaume Chabert. Nous essayons d'avancer sur ce sujet-là dans le cadre du groupe de travail du G20 sur l'architecture financière internationale. Il y a des discussions en cours pour essayer de convaincre tout le monde de l'utilité d'avoir une explication publique sur le processus avec les différentes étapes, comment ça se passe. Et si possible, c'est l'avis des membres du Club de Paris, des calendriers indicatifs sur le temps que peut prendre les différentes étapes. Évidemment, c'est un sujet sensible. Chaque pays a ses propres processus internes et les membres du Club de Paris respectent les processus internes des autres membres du G20. Mais il n'empêche que le message qui a été délivré, qu'il faut qu'on aille plus vite entre la demande d'un pays d'avoir un traitement par le cadre commun et la formation du comité de créanciers, on peut faire beaucoup de progrès. Le cas de l'Éthiopie et le cas de la Zambie ont montré qu'on avait pris par le passé trop de temps. Il y a aussi évidemment l'amélioration de la transparence sur les données. C'est quelque chose qui, d'une certaine manière, ne dépend pas du cadre commun, parce que dans le cadre commun, nous partageons l'information, la transparence, normalement, a déjà eu lieu, mais en amont, c'est toujours utile de favoriser un échange d'informations entre les pays et le FMI et la Banque mondiale. Je crois aussi une manière de renforcer les choses, c'est ce que vous faites aujourd'hui, c'est d'avoir des occasions d'expliquer à beaucoup de pays comment cela fonctionne. L'idée n'est pas d'inciter les pays à demander des traitements de dette quand ils n'en ont pas besoin, parce qu'effectivement, demander un traitement de dette, c'est une décision qui est difficile. Un des principes du cadre commun, c'est qu'il y a une comparabilité de traitement avec les créanciers privés et avec les autres, avec l'ensemble des créanciers officiels. Donc, c'est une décision difficile qui peut éventuellement avoir des impacts sur la notation. Donc, effectivement, ce n'est pas pour tous les pays, mais je pense qu'il est important de montrer l'atout du cadre commun et comment les choses fonctionnent. Je terminerai sur le fait que on a effectivement un cadre qui s'applique pour un certain nombre de pays, les pays à bas revenus. Et la position du Club de Paris est d'être ouvert et même intéressé par une coordination sur les autres pays. et notamment sur le Sri Lanka qui a été mentionné par Guillaume Chabert. Aujourd'hui, le cadre commun ne couvre pas ce pays. Nous avons compris qu'il était d'une certaine manière trop tôt aujourd'hui pour avoir un consensus en G20 pour étendre géographiquement la couverture du cadre commun, mais il nous semble que cela n'empêche pas de proposer aux membres du G20 des coordinations ad hoc sur d'autres pays. Il s'agit bien de travailler ensemble, hein, pas de demander à la Chine et à l'Inde de rejoindre le club, même temporairement, mais vraiment de trouver une manière de travailler ensemble. Donc, ma conclusion, c'est que cette coordination, elle est à améliorer, mais on a fait beaucoup de progrès et le Club de Paris appelle à un approfondissement de cette coordination.
Thank you very much for that. I would just like to check Mr. Nicodim Maho from the Chad government, if you're available to speak. If you could just please switch on your camera if possible so that we can see you. Monsieur Nicodim, vous êtes là?
Oui, bonjour.
Bonjour, monsieur. Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Nicodim is representing the Minister of Finance, Chad. So I'd just like to pose the question for Chad. And this is that we know that Chad is undertaking a debt restructuring under the G20 Common Framework. Could you elaborate on the progress made to date on the debt restructuring under the Common Framework and your particular experience in this process, and what can be done to improve the process through the Common Framework, as has been shared by our colleagues from Zambia and in Ethiopia. So over to you, Mr. Nicodim. Thank you very much.
Merci. Merci beaucoup. Des discussions ont commencé depuis entre le Tchad et les créanciers, bien entendu dans le cadre commun du G20. Et jusqu'à ce jour, le format de la fin de ces discussions ne s'est pas encore dessiné. Néanmoins, les discussions ne peuvent... excusez-moi. Ok, désolé. Hein. Ok, donc les discussions jusqu'à ce jour n'ont pas pu aboutir à un mémorandum entre tous les créanciers devant permettre de finaliser ces discussions. Donc, je ne peux à ce jour vous dire avec exactitude qu'est-ce qui a été fait et de quel créancier nous avions obtenu la certitude, puisque les discussions se font à un niveau un peu élevé, petit. Donc, à ce niveau, je ne pourrais vous donner des leçons appropriées en ce qui concerne les actions à prendre pour obtenir de nos créanciers une restructuration compatible avec les contraintes financières et économiques de l'État tchadien.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nicodim. Did you want to add any other points?
Pour l'instant, non. Comme j'étais pris de cours, je n'ai pas préparé quelque chose pour ajouter. À une autre occasion, nous pourrons vous dire la position exactement du point de vue du technicien pour rendre la dette viable et surtout profitable aux États comme le Tchad, qui, comme bien d'autres États du Sahel, font face à plusieurs crises et qui doivent mener leur politique de manière à ne pas être contraintes, surtout par le poids de la dette. Donc, à ce niveau, de façon cohérente, je ne peux pas vous dire exactement ce qu'il y a lieu de faire. Merci.
Thank you very much for your contribution. So I'd like to move now to Mr. Gayoum Chaber, Deputy Director, Strategy and Policy. We heard from him earlier. And we know that the IMF has been instrumental in supporting several international debt resolution initiatives for member countries over the years. So in your opinion, Gayoum, what lessons have you learned from the past debt resolution initiatives? I know you have presented the common framework, but what role can multilateral development financial institutions in general and the IMF in particular play in addressing Africa's mounting debt vulnerabilities in the context of the common framework? So Gayoum, over to you.
Thank you very much, Victoria. And I would also like to thank the panelists, honestly, because this is really, really a fascinating discussion. And I think all the panelists have put, very good ideas on the table. I hope I also put some contribution, but I just wanted to mention and to thank Brooke Taye for what he said on Africa not being one single situation. That's not true, and even for a single country, it's not as easy as a two one-off assessment. I also liked what he said in the fact that among the things we need to improve, I think distinguishing flow treatment and stock treatment, situation of liquidity difficulty and real solvency difficulties. That's really something that the international community has to deal with, including with the credit rating agencies. I think that's a very important point that Brooke Taye made here. I also liked what Brooke Taye said in terms of it's important to learn by experience, to have some broad guidelines, but not to be too rigid and too strict because it's already a complex situation. So I confirm what I said earlier, which is that having clarity and transparency on the steps in the process, having clarity and predictability in the steps and timelines is important, but also recognizing that it cannot be just because the reality is what it is. It cannot be, as strict as one could like. I also wanted to echo what Gregory Kabwe said in all aspects of what he said, actually, in terms of clarification of the status of the different institutions. Just to mention for TDB, Afreximbank, those categories of lenders, the fund published in May this year a very important paper on the policy of the fund in terms of lending from the IMF in arrears to creditors. And we have clarified very clearly who is a multilateral institution and who is a private creditor. Among the institutions that Gregory Kabwe mentioned, I think we don't assess as a multilateral institution an institution where there is a private shareholder in the capital of the institution. That's an important point to have in mind. So the lending into arrears policy of the IMF, which is absolutely key in all the processing, because we have a differentiation between official sector and private sector. Having this clarity indeed is absolutely essential, I think. Turning to your question in the interest of time also, but before doing so, I think on Chad, Nicodime Maho may contradict me, but I think one lesson also from Chad is beyond all the items that we discussed so far, there is clearly an issue on collateralized financing practices. And honestly, this is not an issue of private sector versus official sector. Collateralized financing practices exist on both sides. And we think at the fund that more clarity should also be brought to the debtor countries on the merits, but also the risks associated with collateralized financing practices, so that in any case decisions are made in full knowledge of of the pros and cons. Last thing I wanted to echo also from Gregory Kabwe is on the private sector participation and information sharing to private creators, early engagement with the private creators. Yes, absolutely yes. I wouldn't like to give the impression from my previous intervention that nothing has to be done in terms of association of the private creators. We've been advocating that the official creator committee and the country authorities should engage very early in the process with the private creators, because the two sides, the depository on the official sector side and the depository on the private sector side, have to go, in parallel. It cannot be done as one single pool because those creators are different, but definitely it has to be done in parallel. That's the only way, to build confidence and to ensure that the comparability of treatment will be implemented at the end of the day. So very briefly turning to your question, Victoria, and sorry for that, but I think it's relevant as well. I wanted to mention 4 perennial issues that all sovereign depository include. One is the asymmetry of information that exists between the debtor and the creditors, including unfair estimates of the capacity to repay of the debtor, which is linked to the assumption on growth and development prospect of the country. Another issue is too little too late. Too little too late. We know from experience that many countries, tend to postpone what is ultimately needed. And honestly, I saw in the chat some questions on development needs. Definitely, it's better to undertake early on a depository in line with what is needed for the development prospect of the countries than to impose to the population some adjustments that are just not feasible. The third issue is how to ensure fair burden sharing among stakeholders, and this is the issue of the comparative treatment. And the fourth issue is to have a coordination that ensure efficient and timely processes. Just coming back to the asymmetry of information, which was my first perennial issue, I think that's where indeed transparency plays a great role. Zambia has put on the internet a lot of information on the debt stock, on the parameters, etc., which I think are really helpful for all stakeholders. I think the IMF and the World Bank also play a key role there in putting on the table neutral assessments of the debt sustainability analysis of the country and the growth prospect macroeconomic framework of the country that can be used by both debtor and creditors to, finalize their negotiation. Lastly, because again, there are many things which could be said, I think we talked a lot about debt, but of course, the debt challenges are also on the side of growth, reforms, private sector-led growth and job issues. So I think what is needed really is a combination of several factors. I think President Adesina mentioned in his intervention the need to act together, and he's very right. We need to act together. There are reforms that countries have to undertake, including on issues such as domestic resources mobilization on the side of the official sector, but also in terms of mobilizing the private savings that exist there and that could develop local financial markets. One of the questions in the chat was about that, and I think it's right. But there is also an issue in terms of financing from the international community through the international financial institutions, through the mobilization of the private sector, through the appropriate incentives, through the channeling of SDRs. President Adesina mentioned that, and you know that we are very supportive of channeling of SDRs that are not necessarily useful in some countries. And there will be cases, of course, where debt restructuring will be necessary, and that's where ensuring a full delivery of the potential of the common framework will be absolutely key. Let me stop here. Over to you, Victoria.
Thank you very much for those remarks. I think it's gone a long way in, I think, substantiating a lot of what has already been said. And I think it's an important perspective. Particularly, I saw our colleagues Zambia nodding, and I think that they're hearing what you have to say. I think there's some common themes there about issues around transparency, the ability of countries, and being realistic about the extent to which they can service their debt and what solutions need to be made in that respect. So I think that's very important. We have quite a number of questions that are coming in the chat. So I will first start with Kevin, because Kevin has spoken. So He has been kind enough to cede the floor in terms of his remarks. So I'll just go ahead and ask him one of the questions that is coming out of the chat. So the question is, what role is the African Development Bank playing, or what role can the African Development Bank play in encouraging debtors to coordinate with each other to learn more lessons from the different creditor negotiations? So that's the question that has been asked from the chat. Kevin?
Yeah, thank you very much, Victoria. First, I'd really like to thank my co-panelists. I think everything has been said on the issues of data transparency, the issue of coordination, bringing in the private sector, and also the procedural clarity for the common framework. So as I said in the beginning, I would like really to see that from this dialogue we have actions that we can agree on, that countries need to do, that us as multilateral development banks needs to do, and also for the G20 and co recommendations we can make in terms of moving faster on these procedures and processes. I would actually like to hear a lot more from the countries, especially like Zambia, who couldn't finish his comments, with regard to their on-the-ground experiences, because that's actually what matters a lot more than these. Now, the question you ask with regard to the role of the African Development Bank Group, it's very well embedded in the opening statements of the President of the African Development Bank. One of the key programs of the bank is the Debt Action Plan. And that action plan for the management and mitigation of debt distress in Africa prioritizes one major aspect in terms of high-level policy dialogue, where the president of the bank and senior leadership of the bank are engaging with the creditors and also engaging with the countries and their fellow MDBs regard to addressing a lot of these challenges that we have raised, including what has been posed in the question. And then also, of course, there are other agencies that are working very hard on this, the Paris Club, the World Bank, the IMF, and we all work together to try and bring some clarity on how to address some of these challenges that we have raised here. I also want to point on one issue that was raised by Gulam and other colleagues with regards to, we talk a lot about the debt side of the question. We're not talking a lot about the growth side of the question, because really the best way to grow out of debt is to grow economies, to diversify economies, to invest in regional value chains, to deepen capital markets and financial markets. And for Africa, we have the ACFTA that's there, a very clear framework that has come at a very right time when we are seeing a lot of push everywhere for regionalizing value chains. So, and regionalizing trade. We hear of friendshoring, reshoring, and all those shoring, so on. So for me also, in terms of how we try to link debt to growth, debt to trade, and also debt to building those value chains so that we can mobilize domestic revenue a lot more on the continent. Because that's our key question, my key interest is how can we actually reduce the focus on debt sustainability and talk a lot more about how Africa can use debt for growth, to make debt work for growth on the continent, because that's a common paradigm for growing economies everywhere. So let me not talk too much, because I promised Victoria that since I've already spoken, I'd like to hear a lot more and learn a lot more from our colleagues, especially from the countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kevin. I noticed that we have quite limited time remaining. I think that the conversation has been very interesting, and therefore people have, we have a lot to discuss. So in the interest of time, what I'll do is I'll go round to our distinguished panelists to ask them for some last remarks, maybe 5 minutes or so. But also there is a question that has been posed in the chat for Zambia and Chad representatives, as well as the African Development Bank. But Kevin, you've already spoken. So I'll ask the Zambian and Chad representatives to respond as appropriate. And on how to go beyond this debt restructuring process and raise new public finance for development from international creditors in their countries. What ideas do they have on this? So this is a question that has been posed. So I'll start with Mr. Gregory Kabwe, and sorry for cutting you off earlier. If there are any additional points that you wanted to include in your response, that would be most welcome. So for each of the panelists, we'll have 5 minutes to close on your last comments and remarks, starting with Mr. Gregory Kabwe. Please go ahead, Mr. Kabwe.
Thank you very much, Victoria. And actually, I'll be quite brief because I was almost winding up even that time. Firstly, maybe just to mention that I think transparency is critical in the entire process of debt restructuring. And in so doing, as a country, we have tried to ensure that we do quarterly bulletins, debt statistical bulletins, which are posted on the website, and other critical information. But we've also gone ahead to try and enhance transparency by bringing on board a new law, and that is the Public Debt Management Act, which has just been assented to, but yet to be published. And once it's published, it will be enforceable. And this law is bringing in timely reporting of critical debt information. And in there, the law prescribes the times at which the debt statistical bulletin, the debt sustainability analysis is going to be published, the medium-term debt strategy, and then the debt statistical bulletins and the other reports that are critical. It also goes ahead to try and enhance the planning aspect of it. And that is bringing on board the annual borrowing plan, which should be approved by Parliament. The critical component of this law, again, is to enhance parliamentary oversight. So most of the loans now going forward will be approved by the National Assembly or the Zambian Parliament, as it were, in form of the annual borrowing plan, which has been prescribed to be approved by this superior body. We hope that with those controls, we should be good enough going forward in terms of the mechanisms or the controls around loan contraction. When it comes to how we sustain the sustainability that we are working on, definitely, and as already indicated by Professor Kevin, we indeed want to grow the economy. And by so doing, we have come up with a number of measures that will entail growing the revenue, the general revenues for the country, and ultimately the gross domestic product, the GDP, just to try and ensure that where the present value of debt stands against the GDP, we are within the prescribed or rather the best practiced limits or levels. So we have mechanisms that are going to grow the mining sector, the agricultural sector, and the other important sectors of this economy to try and contribute to the GDP, as it were. And we hope by so doing, and also with the controls that have now been put in place, especially with the new law that has been assented to, we should be good enough and we should be able to sustain the position that is going to be realized after this process of debt restructuring. I think for now, that is what I would submit, Victoria. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I'd ask seek the indulgence of the organizers. I think we're 10 minutes late in starting, just so that we can close out with our panelists. I'll just check to Monsieur Maho. Do you have anything else to add on the question that has been raised, and any last remarks? Monsieur Maho, vous êtes là?
Oui, je suis toujours là.
Oui, oui. Si vous avez le dernier mot, monsieur.
OK. Merci. Je voudrais ajouter que la question de soutenabilité, c'est une question qui préoccupe non seulement nos États, mais aussi les institutions financières internationales, dont fait partie la Banque africaine de développement. Compte tenu de l'expérience que nous avions et tirant aussi les leçons des discussions actuelles dans le cadre commun du G20 pour restructurer la dette, je proposerais que désormais peut-être nous obtenions de nos partenaires financiers des emprunts dont la maturité est suffisamment longue, donc concessionnelle, afin de prendre en compte les contraintes financières de nos trésors publics. En ce qui concerne les États, nous préconisons que les emprunts soient, l'utilisation des ressources d'emprunt soit vraiment affectée aux projets qui ont vraiment d'impact très significatif sur la croissance, ce qui permettrait à l'économie de générer des ressources nécessaires pour faire face au service de la dette. Nous nous retrouvons actuellement avec des emprunts à maturité très moyennement courte. Et lorsque nous faisons face aux chocs, à des chocs exogènes, il nous est difficile de faire face à ce service à dette. Donc, pour le futur, il serait souhaitable d'obtenir, malgré les contraintes financières sur le marché financier, d'obtenir des maturités suffisamment longues. Et pour les États, il faudrait affecter les ressources d'emprunt à des secteurs qui contribuent significativement à la croissance économique. Merci.
Thank you very much. I'm being told that we ran out of time. So if I could seek the indulgence of Gayum and William to just allow Dr. Tai to make the last remark, and then we can close off the session with your kind consideration. Thank you very much. Dr. Tai, last remarks before we close off?
I'll make this brief. Thank you so much, Victoria, and thanks for everyone. I just wanted to emphasize in pretty much a minute that there is more to be done from our side. And I think we should not hide behind the fact that we're the one who borrowed, we're the one who failed to perform our obligation in terms of investment. There's been an issue that was raised earlier about quality of debt. Not every country can go through growth by borrowing on concessional terms. There will be a commercial financing. I think more than the quality of data or the quality of the type of data that we're taking, we need to focus on our quality of making sure that we fulfill our obligation in terms of infrastructure projects. What we borrowed in the past 8-9 years in Ethiopia, we've managed to build 700 kilometers of railway, which we export 98% of our coffee, for example. We built thousands of roads, built thousands of electrification throughout the country. That is debt spent in a quality way into a project that helps the country. So our way of coming out of the debt trap, the debt stock issue is to really grow out of it. But the focus, and I think this is a challenge to the fund and the challenge to our colleagues from African Development Bank, is to help us also in terms of having a quality management of projects and garnering the necessary skill set, because borrowing is not an issue. How do we spend the money is the issue. If we spend it wisely in projects that will generate significant amount of revenue, I think we would not have this type of conversation every 20 years. Thank you so much, Victoria.
Thank you very much. I think I will not attempt to summarize what we've discussed this morning. I think it's been an excellent conversation. And please, a big thank you to all our panelists, Mr. William Ruse, Professor Kevin Orama, Gayum Shaber, Gregory Kawe, and Dr. Tay. Thank you very much for a very fruitful and interesting conversation. And at this point, I would like to hand over back to our moderator, Mr. Solomon Mogera. Thank you very much, colleagues.
Thank you, Dr. Chisala. That was an enlightening session. Very good discussions there from Victoria's panelists who comprised of government officials from Ethiopia, Zambia, and Chad, representatives from the Paris Club, the IMF, and the African Development Bank.